You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, everybody, welcome to Head, a Star Wars podcast. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. So we thought that it would actually be a good idea to start out by talking about why we even decided to do this podcast and who are we? Why should you even listen to us? So how did you get into the whole Star Wars thing?
I think I was probably like around 7 or 8 years old. Of course, I was born after the original trilogy. So, of course, I didn't have the frame of reference like everyone else. But my uncle, who pretty much introduced me to everything cool growing up from the 80s and early part of the 90s as well, for my birthday, he actually bought me the box set of the original trilogy.
Wait, so this is like the VHS one?
Yeah, the VHS, like the old school, like the box thing. And I'm like, what the heck is this? So, he just kind of gave it to me. He's like, they're really great movies. You'll love them. I was like, I don't know. But he always kind of knew I was a science kid. So he figured, I would be into it.
So he gave you like no background whatsoever. Like didn't tell you anything about it. Just like, here, have some videos.
Exactly. So it's pretty much like, all right, well, I'm a kid. I'm like, okay. And one day, literally, I didn't watch them immediately. I just remember one day I was kind of bored. And I was like, well, I wonder what these are. So I popped the first one in. It was A New Hope. The covers look cool. The characters kind of look really, they had the giant head of Vader and everything like that. So I was like, okay, what the heck is this guy? And then, of course, you got the guy, he's got this big beam of light coming down with like this amazing hot chick who turns out to be a sister, which is kind of
what
creepy.
Was always funny about that, too? And speaking about these VHS covers, is just how much false advertising was behind that.
I know.
Like Luke was all like ripped and, everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, Leia's, it's like nothing like what they actually were like.
Exactly. It's like your
movie.
Your Aunt Cheryl is like, got these buns in her hair. And it's like when you actually watch the movie. So I remember like watching the movie and I had no context of who these characters were. It started off, I've never seen a movie that actually had like, words coming up. That was just like weird for me. So I'm like, okay. So I'm reading the whole thing and then the story. And then the first shot, of course, is, Channel 4, flying over and then getting chased by a giant Star Destroyer. And it's like already like in this whole battle. So I'm like, well, at least it's got some action out the gate. So this is cool. And then, as I'm watching it, it's like, man, okay. And then that's the first scene you see Vader. So you're like, okay, no, you can definitely tell he's the bad guy, but what the heck is he about? Because he's like tall, he's got this giant helmet, and he's this booming deep voice. So you're kind of like, okay, where is this going? And so, of course, subsequently, I'm watching The New Hope, and then I was like, man, this is really awesome. And then I was like, it continues in Empire, and it gets even better. And then, of course, by the Return of the Jedi, I'm just like, wow, like this is like the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, that's pretty much how I got hooked on it. What about you?
Well, and for me, it was real interesting because, of course, being that I'm old enough that I was 7 years old when, A New Hope was actually released. In fact, when it was released, it wasn't even called A New Hope. It was just Star Wars.
Wow.
It still said Episode 4, but it didn't say Episode 4 A New Hope. So it was just Star Wars. And then, of course, even at 7 years old, that was the first thing that popped in my head. I'm like, well, Episode 4, well, okay, what happened to 1, 2, and 3?
Right.
Why is it starting like right in the middle of this whole...
I don't think I learned my Roman numerals yet, so I probably didn't care.
Yeah, well, that's another thing, right? It's like, okay, on top of that, you're going to throw Roman numerals out at us? It's like, okay, didn't George say this was made for kids, right? But the thing that was funny about it, though, is that my dad, he basically was talking about, okay, I got to go see it first. Because obviously, being an actual parent, he's like, hey, let me go check it out and make sure it's cool. And it's not even so much that there would be anything that would be bad as much as, would I be scared of any scenes?
Gotcha.
So, it was one of those things where, okay, let me just, see what was up. And I just remember, from the very first scene, with the Tantive 4 like flying by, and then the Star Destroyer was endless. It's like the first time you're just seeing the ship and like it just keeps going
Right.
and going. And you're, you know, and you also have to remember that at that time, nobody had ever seen anything like this before.
So that kind of makes me ask the question. So, and I'm glad you brought that up because
The scenes, and it would just have like this floating thing in space. Like it just looked like some weird movie. And I think honestly, a lot of people went to just, what is this? I mean, I don't think that anybody really knew what it was. And I think honestly, it was like a word of mouth thing.
Yeah, because I mean, like you see people, going to the Chinese theater and you see like lines like wrapped around.
Yeah, wrapped around the building.
And like at that time, George Lucas, he only made like American Graffiti and, a couple of other movies.
That THX.
The THX movie. So there wasn't really a whole lot of, it's not like Spielberg or anything where he's like dropping these huge massive.
No, it was like an independent movie.
Exactly. So, and that's what I'm always just so curious and fascinated by is that at that time, of course, I wasn't around, but at that time, like what drove everybody to.
Well, I mean, I could tell you even from just me, right? So, I mean, I see the movie, and by the end of the movie, I had my dad immediately drive to Toys R Us so I could get an action figure.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it just had that kind of a profound effect that, as soon as I saw it, I was a Star Wars fan for life at that point. And I mean, of course, the only thing that they had, because as soon as they released the figure, it was funny. I actually watched this documentary the other day on Netflix. There's a series where it was like different toys and stuff like that.
Right.
And it's this whole documentary on how the Star Wars toys got made. Really fascinating stuff. I hadn't even known, like, even though I was there, I didn't really know all this, background stuff.
Wow, yeah.
And what was cool about it was the fact that they were talking about how nobody really could have foreseen this explosion of, demand, really. So what ended up happening is these guys like couldn't keep up with the demand because they were making like all these toys almost to order.
Oh, wow.
They didn't even have like the molds right. They ended up retrofitting other action figures that they had and just making them Star Wars figures.
It's just like, all right, we're just going to borrow this G.I. Joe and...
Yeah, essentially, yeah. That's exactly what it was. We're just going to borrow this, like, well, I don't know, what do you got in the back room, Like, well, I got this guy, it's like, all right, we'll just...
Kind of looks like Luke Skywalker.
Yeah.
Let's put him out there.
Like, we'll just paint his hair yellow and kick him out, And I mean, and that was basically what it was. So, that really... Because I never really understood that, even when I was back. I'm like, I see the movie and I'm like, how they sold out? This movie's only been out for a couple of months.
Right.
I just figured at the time, my 7-year-old mind figured, well, okay, all the main characters were sold out. So all they had was C-3PO. He's like, you remember Jingle All the Way?
Yeah.
He was the booster. Remember, because everybody didn't want Booster or whatever his name was. I think that's what he was called. It was the same kind of thing. I just figured, okay, C-3PO wasn't exactly in demand. And even when I bought the figure, right, it's the only Star Wars figure I had.
Wow. Now, I mean, and that also brings up a point because with it being an independent movie, and so the fact that they even had toys for an independent movie is kind of odd.
Yeah, well, that's because, and I'm trying to remember how they put it in this documentary, but they had, is like Lucas somehow knew that, he was going to at least make some money on marketing this thing or something. It's really kind of weird when you stop and think about it, because the whole reason that we all know now why episode 4, why he started with that, was because it was the only one in the whole thing that had a complete beginning, ending. It could act as its own independent film.
Right.
It didn't, there was no cliffhangers or anything like that.
Right.
It actually had a definitive beginning and end.
So, I mean, yeah, and because that's my next question for you then would be, okay, because see, for me, like I knew there was more because I had the 3 tapes. So, but for you all, you're going to see, okay, Star Wars. And at the end of the movie, I'm sure everybody was like clapping and cheering and going crazy. So did you all even have a clue that there was like an Empire Strikes Back coming? Or
Well, I mean, by the time that I got into it, it was already doing well enough that I think they might have announced like a second movie. But the thing that's funny, though, is that I think, speaking for me personally, and I think I remember my friends were the same way, you know, it said 4, episode 4. So you go, well, okay, if there's a 1, 2, and 3, you would think maybe there's a 5.
Yeah. I mean, that's,
So, I mean, from that standpoint, I think that we thought maybe there would be another one.
that's true. That's a good point.
And actually, what's pretty cool, I have a picture of it somewhere. Maybe I can actually put it in the show notes because I have it. I have it digitally now because I took a picture of the picture. But I'm like this little kid, probably about 9 or 10, because I was 9 years old. I was like maybe 3 months away from my 10th birthday when Empire came out.
Mm.
So it came out in May of 1980.
Yep.
And before they actually released the movie, they released the movie in a comic book form. Really
wow.
thick, almost graphic novel. And in this picture, I'm holding that comic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sweet. So did it reveal that Vader was Luke's father in that comic?
Yeah. Which is why I was really shocked that it came out when it came
Wow.
out. Now, I mean, it might have also been a thing too, where there might have been like a part 1 or part 2 to it, and maybe part 1 was up to a certain point
Of the movie. Okay, well that would make sense because that's like one of the biggest cliffhangers like in cinema.
Yeah, but
history.
you got to remember though, at that time, it's like nobody thinks of spoilers or that whole mentality didn't exist back then.
Yeah, but
I mean, even though I know what you're saying, it's kind of like, well, people still don't want to know what the end of the movie is, even though we might not have had the term spoiler.
right. And I remember, if I recall, I think I was watching one of the documentaries about it or something, but they were saying that they kept that secret even from the cast. Like the cast didn't even know until.
Well, yeah, there was supposed to be, I think, I remember something about like they actually changed it or whatever, because of course the whole big thing about the Leia's kissing Luke and then they end up being brother and sister.
Yeah, that was kind of.
So it's kind of like that was a little creepy.
I'm like, all right, George, what do you got going on?
Yeah, that was
there?
a little bit of a retrofit. It's like, did you forget that scene was in there or what?
Right.
So I mean, by the time Empire came out, of course, that was a monster hit. I mean, once again, the lines were going around the block again, but it was even worse though, because like the theaters were just packed. And I remember going to see it on opening night, with my parents in tow.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like every main character that came on the screen, there was just this thundering applause, just like insane amount of, it's like being at a rock concert basically. And me, I'm sitting there as a 9 or 10-year-old kid going, will you all just shut up so I can hear this? I'm missing dialogue here.
Right. Yeah, it's like, yeah, we didn't pay to hear you guys scream, kind of want to hear what's
Well, and
going
especially it's kind of like, okay, they're cheering for, once again, I'm not trying to dog out C-3PO. My apologies in advance to Anthony Daniels if he ever hears this, but because I love C-3PO, he's one of my favorites. But at the same time, it's like, dude, I mean, it's a robot. Why are you cheering like this?
Well, I mean, maybe it's just fabulous acting because I will have to give him credit for that. Like, for him bringing C-3PO to life, I mean, that's his movements and then the way he just tilts his head and
yeah, because there's no actual movement in the suit itself. Like the mouth doesn't move. Or
exactly.
like that.
He has so much personality, and then just the voice that comes out of it, and
well, that was another thing. He was unique because you got to think of the films that were out at that time, especially sci-fi.
Right.
I mean, the biggest ones were like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and if you think about, the robots, androids, all this other stuff, nothing like,
Mm-hmm.
C-3PO, R2-D2. These guys were completely new at that time.
Right. So, in this, I'm glad that you brought up the whole the time period because, for those of you, I'm sure you guys don't know this, but you're about to find out now that Eric and I both are into the video industry. We're videographers. So, from a cinematography standpoint and a visual standpoint, like how much did Star Wars play a part in choosing the path that you're on now?
Oh, the whole videography thing?
Yeah, just the cinematography, the visuals.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, and I don't even remember if I've ever really gone that much into the story with you anyway, but, it really, Because you got to remember that when I came into the whole video world, it was because I had taken a photography class, and a friend of mine was in the video class, and he kept saying, "Oh, you should really do this, and then maybe we can, be in the thing together or whatever." Because he was in the advanced crew by then, because they had an advanced class. So I mean, I wasn't like, I was okay with photography, but the teacher at the time was just like, I mean, she was brutal. She was amazing, great artist, but she was just like really, really hard and everything. And it's like, I knew that if I continued on with her, I might not do as well. So I started thinking, well, okay, this guy keeps bugging me to take this class. Let me just try and check it out, see what it's like.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, exactly. See, ladies and gentlemen, peer pressure does actually work. So, I mean, I took it, and I was actually going to drop the thing after the third day because, the teacher was just even worse than the photography teacher. She was like, she had this red hair that, was just like kind of like sticking out, and all over the place. And, she kind of looked like Heat Miser from The Year Without a Santa Claus. And, so I mean, she kind of freaked me out. And I was just like, you know what? I don't even know this is for me. Because that's the funny thing about the whole video thing is that I wasn't like I got into it because I had some major love of production or, that I saw something like Star Wars and thought, oh, you got to remember my career choices at the time were either going to be psychology or ichthyology, which is a study of fish. I wanted to study sharks.
Right.
And it was just like, I just sort of fell into the video thing and, found out that I really loved to do it. And that's what really changed my whole path. And that's when I started looking at things like Star Wars with a whole different, like a different viewpoint. That's when I started to appreciate, all the, like a lot of the visuals and the cinematography and all that.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the things that made me really get into or want to get into television and movies and things like that. Just of the, I love the story. I love how I was just always so fascinated by how people were able to create things like this. Like even from not really, even as a kid, realizing that the weather map really wasn't there. It's really a green screen. So I'm just thinking like, okay, well, how are they making these, these giant ships fly around and
that's
these space battles? And
because like even with the weather map, when I was a kid, the weather map really was there. It was like something that they would just stick little cardboard clouds and suns and stuff like that to. And then all of a sudden, you get the chroma key version. And you're just like, whoa.
Right.
And it's not really there, but
you're just like,
well, how are they doing this?
Right. Yeah. So that was kind of like, I could definitely say Star Wars has definitely impacted me in that regard. Just simply, it opened my mind to what's possible. And, it makes people kind of like who have an active imagination start to dream about, well, dang, what can I create or what can I do? So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing that, I think a lot of times what gets lost in the whole thing is that people forget that at its heart, Star Wars is storytelling.
Absolutely.
And it really does open the imagination. Because another thing, this was true a little bit with, the Lord of the Rings thing, the Narnia stuff, where you did have, these other worlds. But this is the first time that you saw it on screen to where you actually had this whole world.
Right. The whole Middle Earth thing.
Yeah. It was like, you actually had this whole thing on the screen and it just really opens your mind.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I think that's the reason why kids got into it so much was it stimulated the imagination.
Yeah. I think Star Wars took a lot of risk and a lot of chances, even just from the whole, when it first comes on and it's like a long time ago in the galaxy far, far away. And then it's that giant blare, like that fanfare.
Oh, yeah.
At the beginning, you're just
and I mean, that you jump a little bit.
Exactly.
When that thing
Especially
comes, you don't expect it.
Exactly. So you're just like, what the? Then you got the words coming up and you're trying to read. And then it's like this. It's always some, if you look at all the movies, it's generally some major thing that's going on at that moment. that kind of sucks you into the story, and then everything starts to unravel. And I just think it's, once again, just beautiful and very creative storytelling from the mind of George Lucas. And so, speaking of the movies and storytelling, all stories have characters. So, I'm sure, I already know the answer to this, but the world would like to know.
The whole world's been waiting for this.
Exactly. So, okay.
Finally, they're doing this podcast.
Who is your favorite Star Wars character and why?
Well, growing up, it was always Han Solo.
Han Solo.
Simply because, he just had this this swagger, nothing could get to him. No matter what situation they were in, it's I got this. Even when he didn't have it.
Right, he had it.
He kind of thought he did. And of course, Vader always appealed to me as well.
Yeah, Vader's always going to be the classic. Everybody loves Vader for their own respective reasons.
But that was the thing that was so funny. It was a lot of my friends were all Luke Skywalker fans. And
the typical hero. Yeah.
Yeah, I really wasn't. Only because, and maybe that's why, is because now later on with the complexity, and that's the other thing that we'll eventually probably delve into as well, is that once they started writing the expanded universe novels, because actually when you came into Star Wars, that was around the time, as what year would you say?
That I started watching Star Wars?
Yeah, that your uncle gave you those, VHS tapes.
That had to be probably 90 between 92 and 93, somewhere around there.
All right, so it was only maybe a few years after Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire novel came out. Because, the thing about it, too, is that, after Return of the Jedi, which came out in 83, there was sort of a dead space. There were cultural references in movies, but, there was nothing really active going on in Star Wars.
Right.
Although I do remember, people fight me on this, too. So if any of you guys out there can corroborate this for me, there was a Starlog magazine or something like that, some sci-fi magazine, that talked about that they were starting to work on the prequels in around 89 or 90. Maybe 88, somewhere in there. And there was an actual shot of Mark Hamill in Darth Vader's helmet, not the mask, but just the helmet. And he was pledging his allegiance to the Emperor or something.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So
it was all these stills or something. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, okay, they're going to start to do this, and they're just going to have Mark Hamill play Anakin.
Oh, okay.
Almost like play his own dad kind of thing.
Okay.
And then it never materialized. Now, I think I saw that shot or something pop up somewhere online. But yeah, there was, and then, of course, you never heard from it again. And that was about the only rumblings that you heard, about any other Star Wars movies at least being made. It wasn't until Timothy Zahn came out with Heir to the Empire that it reignited Star Wars, at least to a degree, in the minds of the fans.
Okay, cool.
Because, with the Return of the Jedi, it was sort of okay, that was it.
Right.
It was no more Star Wars.
Yeah, I think that was I think that was a quiet period. And I hated the fact that, there was nothing else. And so that's why I was so happy that, in 99, when they decided to actually do. Well, yeah,
and I was just about to ask you too, is that, here you are, you're just getting into Star Wars for the first time. And so now you got that same excitement undoubtedly that I had.
Right.
And then nothing. At least when I got into it, it was during the cycle,
right.
More movies. Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to Empire. You're just kind of okay, I'm getting into all these movies and, well, there's a book.
Well, yeah, for me, I think it was kind of all right, I just, of course you realize that these movies had taken place, before I was born. So, I just kind of figured that, that was just the end of it. And then I remember, by the time, Phantom Menace came out, I was in high school. And I remember being super excited because wait, they're bringing more Star Wars movies and now they're telling the story of Vader. So, going back to the characters, of course, he's still like one of my, of course, all time like favorite characters and villains of all times. But my absolute favorite probably would be Yoda, simply because he was so wise and his philosophy on things was just kind of cool to me. And, he was super powerful and it's like he's so unassuming. So that was so cool about Yoda. And then he was hilarious, like the stuff that he would do to Luke or, hitting him upside the head with things and things, so.
Yeah, he kind of had a playfulness and then.
Yeah, but he's kind of like that granddad that's kind of like he teaches you lessons. It's almost like the Miyagi, like Karate Kid thing where he teaches you about yourself and things and without you even realizing that it's happening.
Well, once again, it's, because we all know every Star Wars fan knows that, Lucas borrowed from a lot of classic literature.
Yep.
And he combined a lot of things together, and then of course the classic storytelling techniques like the hero's journey, things like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why this stuff appeals, because it's these recurring themes that, we see in general storytelling all the time.
Yeah. I mean, and
Yoda certainly fits that.
Oh yeah, definitely. He's like the wise old shaman type guy. And then of course, even the sketches of Vader's helmet is like old, Japanese samurai style things, even the lightsaber, just the whole weaponry. And that was cool too, that everything was kind of like, and the galaxy wasn't like this brand spanking new thing. It was used. It was a worn galaxy. It wasn't something that everything's all shiny and metallic. Everything looks like, kind of like the Millennium Falcon was like a hoopty, but it was like that old faithful car that just, you always knew it, you knew what it can do and how it can get you out of trouble. And, I like that aspect of that as well. And that was just, once again, like a risk. And he had to really think about that. Like, what do I want this world to look like? And so,
it's a good point too, because if you think about it, it's one of the first, certainly sci-fi fantasy, because really Star Wars is really more fantasy with sci-fi element, or it's like in a sci-fi setting, but it's really more of a fantasy movie.
Right.
But even still, it's like you had the modern technology of blasters, spaceships, stuff like that, mixed with the lightsaber, which, I mean, even though that's kind of high tech too, it's more of a classic weapon, it's more
right. The sword. It's
more like the sword.
Ancient, very, and that's what I loved about even the whole Jedi Sith religion thing. Is like it's an ancient thing, but that people kind of just dismissed. But it's like no, it's still very prevalent today. So
and affecting their galaxy in ways that they had no idea.
No idea. Like they're pledging their allegiance to this guy who is essentially like one of the greatest, Sith in the world. I mean, well, ever. So, yeah, and they have no clue that that's who he is. They just think he's some old shriveled up, dictator.
Well, and we did too, as if you remember. I mean,
well, yeah.
So in A New Hope, you heard about the Emperor, but you never really saw him.
Right.
Then you saw him in a hologram, in
Empire. Yeah.
Right? You didn't really see him in person until Return of the Jedi. And even then, it was sort of like you kind of knew his power and you could see some examples of it. But, it wasn't quite as... I mean, a lot of it, I remember a conversation you and I once had where it's true. Really, the Emperor's real power, I mean, until at the end when he's shooting lightning and you're like, well, I didn't know anybody could do this.
Right.
But even in Empire, in the beginning of Return of the Jedi, where we really understood his power was the fact that, okay, if he's controlling Vader, we've seen Vader's power.
Exactly.
Now, how powerful is this guy?
Exactly.
Vader's all like kneeling down to him and calling him master. And,
right.
And you're kind of like, well, okay, this guy's got to be like...
Yeah, he's basically like the Yoda of the dark side, essentially. It's like, okay, well, you seeing Yoda like this little 2-foot frog, picking up X-Wings out of a pond and flying them across the forest, man. You're just like...
Exactly.
Luke was like, 20? He couldn't even barely lift a wing up. So now, on the flip side of that, you got, the Emperor who's just as powerful on the dark side. And you're like, okay, he's the one who's holding, as Princess Leia would say, Vader's leash. So, that's just kind of... kind of puts things in perspective for you. Like, okay, this guy's no joke. Which brings me to my next question. So out of the original trilogy, which is your favorite and why?
Well, Empire. Actually, I could say that's true of the whole, even up through now.
Oh, okay. So even that's including Rogue One.
Oh
that's
yeah,
including...
like all of them, man. All of
Okay.
them. Because I mean, and you know what? I would say that just about everybody, well, except for John Campea,
We
would
love you,
cite
John.
Empire as would cite Empire as their favorite. And it's probably just because of the way that it was done. It had a lot of the classic moments. It was a time during. It was a good time period.
Mm-hmm.
For not when the movie was made, but I mean in universe time period.
Gotcha.
It was the most interesting. It was the way that it was done, and just the general story. And it's hard to say why in the minds of, because I'm not the only one that feels this way, in the minds of most Star Wars fans. Why is it that Empire is the one that holds the magic? But if you think about it, Vader was the coolest during that time period. You saw a lot more of the Empire. The story was really cool. The interaction between Han and Leia.
Yep.
That started to develop, and the way that was written was just pure brilliance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, growing up, of course, like as a kid, my favorite was Return of the Jedi, simply because, the beginning of it, you see like how powerful Luke is becoming. You see him, first you're kind of wondering like what the heck happened, because he's dressed in all black and he's got a black hood on, and you're like,
well, yeah, no, I'm not downing now. Return of the Jedi was, that was one of the, I remember when I was a kid, just like I couldn't wait because, first of all, like you said, they drop you with this big cliffhanger about, well, is Darth Vader his father or what?
Right.
And you're wondering what's going on in Luke's head. But then, from, the opening scenes, he's all dressed in black. He's force choking,
guards and everything.
Yeah, he's like doing all this stuff, and you're just kind of like, whoa, this guy's like, he's learned a few things.
Yeah, Luke's been in some books. But no, I mean, like, I think Return of the Jedi was my favorite as a kid, just because it was more...
It's the Ewoks, wasn't it?
No, I mean, the little crazy teddy bears, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, it was kind of hilarious, and I thought they were cool in their own respective way, but I think it was just more so like, okay, now you see the evolution of Luke, but the only reason why I can say Return of the Jedi was my favorite is because it didn't scare me as much as Empire. Like as a kid, Empire creeped me out, man.
No, Empire, because straight up, man, that was almost like fantasy horror right there.
Yeah, because like some of the scenes, man, like, okay, like that whole scene when like Vader is just standing on top of that platform and it's just, you see the silhouette and he's got that booming. His voice is a significant. I think Vader hit puberty or something in Empire, man, because his voice is a whole lot deeper than New Hope.
Well, he was a lot.
And then he was he was choking people left and right. And then on top of that, he's the shots of that, and once again the cinematography of it. Like one of the coolest scenes to me now, I still love it, is when they drop Han into the whole carbonite and that all the smoke comes up and then Vader's face just kind of comes through the smoke, and it's like, man. But the fact that he's like attacking Luke out of nowhere, like he's like the boogeyman or something. So you're like, okay, he's like really like trying to hurt Luke at this point.
Yeah, Vader was definitely the man.
Yeah, he was kind of ticked off, and then he lopped off Luke's hand. I mean, it was just really aggressive, and I mean, you had, the whole Leia and Han thing, which was cool, and I like.
Well, I think Han was also probably the funniest.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like you got more of him, and it was cool. And then of course you had Lando come out. We were introduced to Lando.
Yep, Mr. Billy D. Williams, but also one of the biggest things that made Empire really cool, and it can't go unnoticed. It's the first time you hear the Imperial March. I mean, that's like one of the most, like, once again, one of the most iconic,
Well, and the music in that movie, I think, was probably the best, because I actually had, of course, they were vinyl records.
I had it too, yep.
But it was like, it was a soundtrack to that.
Yep, I had the actual
and I didn't I didn't want the soundtrack to A New Hope or Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
But I really wanted that soundtrack to Empire Strikes Back, and I listened to it. I mean, I'm like a 10-year-old kid
conducting, air conducting.
Yeah, and it's like I would stop listening to whatever I was listening to, some rock thing, and then put on the Empire Strikes Back soundtrack or something.
Yeah, I mean, everybody, like, I remember as a kid, like, you hear those the beginning of the Imperial March, and you just kind of like stop because it commands such a presence, and I think
it's a perfect Vader thing.
Yeah.
Without question.
Yeah, when he walks in, you're just like, uh-oh.
It just gives you a whole new perspective on, and that's really, when you stop and think about it, that's what our show is about.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of times it's kind of like, I remember we were sitting there thinking like, okay, when we were even thinking of doing a Star Wars podcast, it's like, all right, there's already all these people that are out there that are doing them. Mm-hmm. And that they're very, some of these, I mean, a lot of them are really good.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's almost like, well, why? But it comes down to just, it's another voice or two out there. And, you came into Star Wars during the 80s. Mm-hmm. So you basically came into it in between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy.
Right.
So, your perspective on it is unique and interesting. And then, of course, there's me. I was there right from the beginning. I actually remember what it was like before Star Wars.
Right.
And I experienced that. And of course, people that we'll probably bring onto the show or talk to or whatever. Well, maybe we'll get some people that came into it after the prequel trilogy or.
Right. And I mean, that's what's cool even now, just to see that, from a standpoint of family, it's like, okay, I mean, granted, neither one of us have kids, but if we did have kids, you have this whole generation now that can grow up with Star Wars in their own generation.
Yeah, it belongs to them.
But we are all a part of it, though. So it's like, you can say, oh, yeah, I remember when it was first released. And then let's say your wife was, born in my era or something like that. And then so she can, speak to it from that perspective. And then now you get to see your child and they're like, okay, well, wow, they're watching Rebels and all these other, cartoon shows and things like that. But then they can go back and watch now the DVDs instead of the VHS, well, Blu-rays now.
Laserdisc.
So, and that's kind of cool too, that, now it becomes this whole full circle where, you all can kind of sit as a family and kind of talk about, their own perspectives on Star Wars. So that's the cool thing. So shout out to Disney for bringing it back for this generation.
Well, I remember when the day that you and I got the announcement.
Yeah.
I mean, not like they announced it to us personally, but I mean.
Unfortunately, I think we should have been in the boardroom, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Oh, if I remember correctly, I think we were on our way to see the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D movie.
It might have. I just remember sitting at the computer because
you were sitting at the computer at the studio where we worked, and I remember we were getting ready to see the movie or whatever, and you just said, hey, because being that I usually got the jump on all the news, it seemed like every time you would try to tell me something, I'd be like, oh yeah, man, I knew about that like 3 months ago or something.
Right.
And so you just said all matter of factly to me one day. I remember you're just like, yeah, man. So, they're making episode 7 or whatever. And I remember just like stopping dead in my tracks. Like, what?
Yeah. And I was like, no, yeah, this is like right when Lucas
Lucas sold it. They made that big announcement.
And then they also included like, oh yeah, they're making 7, 8, 9. We're like,
yeah, and then they're going to do a movie every year, and in between the episodic films, they were going to do like a standalone movie, and it's just like, that's a lot to take in when you're a Star Wars fan, thinking that, like, I remember when you and I went and saw the Clone Wars movie.
Yeah.
After episode 3. Mostly, I mean, we were curious, but the reason why we saw it in the theater was we thought, well, cool, at least we get to see another Star Wars related thing in the theater, because we thought it would never happen again.
Right, exactly. Yeah, after we saw, because I remember like, we were thinking to ourselves back, I still remember when we saw in 2005, when we saw Revenge of the Sith, and it was like, okay, man, like, this is the last Star Wars.
Yeah.
Because this is it, because... okay, you had the original trilogy and then you told the story of Vader. So it's like, at that point, I mean, yes, you had books that kind of covered things after the Battle of Endor and everything like that. But, we didn't expect anybody to make any movies after that. And so,
no, Lucas himself said that.
that was
done.
Yeah.
That it was over. There weren't going to be any more movies. And of course, we figured, okay, as long as he's alive, nobody's going to be able to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that was it. And then all of a sudden, you get this big announcement that there's going to be even more.
Right. And then, now they're getting different directors to, take the different films. So it's not just one director doing the whole trilogy. You have different directors who bring their own flavor and their own style to the Star Wars universe. So I think that's super cool too. So, I mean, Disney's really been, kicking butts between that and Marvel, man. It's just like they really kind of got a grasp on things. So,
oh yeah, I mean, they're, and a lot of people, I get it. A lot of people were critical of it. I was one of those guys, and I remember you were the same way, where we were like, "This is the best thing in the world."
Yeah,
I thought, okay, giving it to Disney, that's like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, definitely, because they're taking franchises and they're expanding them, and like I said, the whole Marvel thing.
Well, yeah, the Marvel thing, the Marvel Cinematic, the MCU is basically about 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to remember when Iron Man was that 09 or was it 07?
Might have been. I can't remember. It might have been 09. But I just remember, when they started that whole thing, and it's and as they were bringing new content to the screens, we're just kind of wondering, like, man, I wonder what they're going to do with this now. And thank goodness they still have Kathleen Kennedy, who still heads up, Lucasfilm. So she was there with George the whole time. So there's that continuity on that end, and she still works well with him. But then she's bringing in new talent. And taking the Star Wars universe into, different directions. So, I'm just really excited, to see where they're going to go, especially after 9, because now it's like, okay, well, now what? What happens then? So we're definitely going to be covering that in the podcast. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this podcast, that's what we should do, too, is tell everybody, how we even came up with all this stuff. Because, like I had said before, there are so many podcasts out there. Mm-hmm. That it's almost like, I mean, other than just adding your own voice, what is the point? And a couple of times we would be talking about Star Wars. We would get into some conversation or a debate or whatever. And, people have always said to us, like, you guys should have your own show or something.
Right.
And so finally, after, this had happened to us a number of times, we thought, you know what? We do get into some really good discussions. Sometimes they're debates, but a lot of times they're just discussions.
Fortunately, they're not aggressive negotiations.
Yes, not aggressive negotiations, and no lightsabers are used at all. So, I mean, this is one of those things where I was thinking, like, this would be a really, really good thing, is that if other people can actually not only hear these discussions, but actually participate in them.
Yeah.
So we definitely want to hear from everybody out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's what makes Star Wars fun. Everybody has their own opinion. Everybody has their own perspectives, and that's.
Yeah. I mean, leave your comments in the comment sections, keep it nice.
Yes.
Don't make fun of us too bad now. We're one of you.
Yeah, exactly.
So, be nice. But yeah, I mean, we want to, if you have a differing opinion, or if you want to side with one of us, or if you want to side with neither of us and tell us we're crazy, and
yes, do the whole Gray Jedi thing.
Yeah, because I mean, and what we're gonna do, we'll have some different segments, to lead our discussion. We'll have one that we call the Cantina. That's going to be like our general news discussions. So whatever happens during the week.
Then we have Do or Do Not. Which is
the face-off question.
Yeah, it's the face-off question. So we'll kind of pick, 2 characters or something like that, and we'll just kind of debate about who's better, or who's the coolest one to do this or whatever.
Basically what we've all been doing since we were kids.
Exactly. It's the schoolyard face-off question.
Remember Super Shadow?
Oh my goodness. Super Shadow. So we say Super Fraud.
You know what? Yeah. Now I gotta tell you guys. We have to confess that we fell for the whole Super Shadow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably shouldn't really put this out there, but we fell for it, and we would actually eagerly check out the site and see what the latest news was. But that's sort of what this do or do not thing reminds me of a little bit, because people used to write to him all the time, like, well, who would win in a duel between, like Padme and Leia or something?
Exactly. It's like the dumbest question sometimes, but then there were also some good ones.
Oh yeah, there were great ones.
Yeah, so
I got a little silly sometimes when they were bringing in other people. But what if Spider-Man went up against Darth Vader? It's like, okay, man.
Yeah, exactly.
And then of course he would just be all like, well, I spoke to George yesterday, and
right, who he has absolutely no connection with.
No. We should probably stop talking about him too, because Lucasfilm will probably shut us down.
Before we even get started.
Right. But that's what the do or do not thing is about. It's basically like we'll just pick some topics or some characters or something that we can, take some different sides on, or, who knows? We might even agree. Like it might be like a who is a better whatever, and both of us might actually agree, but we'll discuss it and tell you why we agree, and you can tell us why you don't.
Absolutely.
And then of course we have a segment that we're going to call Duel of the Fates, which is our featured topic. It's going to be the featured discussion topic for the podcast.
So we were talking about, Rogue One, if we're talking about the new Han Solo movie or trailers or whatever the case may be, that's kind of like the meat and potatoes of the
Or you know what? It might even be something from
the
one of the
original
other movies or the books or...
Yep, the game, comics, all that.
Yeah, it could be anything. It'll just be basically a discussion topic. And you guys are more than welcome to submit topics that you'd like to hear us discuss.
Yeah, that'd be awesome too. And then,
which of course, leads us to the final one.
Yes, clear your mind. Yes, we have to clear our minds of all questions. So that is the part where we need you all to hit us up on Twitter. We'll have our Facebook account that you can send in questions, or you can just put them in the comment section. We can answer the questions as best as we can, and that probably will actually stir up some other debates and things of that nature as well. So that's, the part where you guys really get to be interactive with us.
Yeah. I mean, we're looking forward to doing that, because that's one of the other reasons why we wanted to start this podcast, because every time we watch Star Wars related shows or listen to the podcast, we want to get in on these discussions too.
Exactly.
So I mean, we really are looking forward to hearing from you guys and, what you have to say, and who knows? We might regret that later.
Right, we have to put that embargo on.
Yeah, right. Questions. It's like all of a sudden, comments have been disabled for this. No more clearing our mind. We're going to clear the podcast of this segment.
Cloudy the future will be.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for the first one.
Absolutely. Hopefully this is sort of our episode 0. So hopefully you guys learned a little bit more about us, what we're about, why we started the podcast. This is a good reference. So, if we're 100 or 200 episodes in, being very optimistic here, then, this is something that you can always go back to, and you can see this is why we're doing this whole thing. We're doing this for us, but we're also doing this for you guys.
Yeah, so it's kind of our passion. We like to have fun with it. Star Wars is for everybody. Everyone's on equal footing, whether you're just getting into the movies or you're a super fan where you've read all the books, you got video games.
And that's another...
You've been to Comic-Con,
yes.
You might have even went to D23 or something like that.
Yeah, because you know what? And I mean, even though I've been into this whole thing from the beginning, and I could be a jerk and look down on people that just came in on Force Awakens or something.
Right.
Like, oh, well, you're the new guy. There's people that have read a lot more comics or something like that than I have, that, and we just have to realize that we're all one big community.
Yeah.
This isn't, nobody's better than anybody else just because you've been in it longer. The person that just came in on The Last Jedi.
Exactly.
Has just as much validity as,
Yeah, everybody has their own perspective on this world of Star Wars. And so that's what we're here for. We're here to have fun and enjoy it. So, yeah, we're going to have fun with this, guys.
All right. Well, once again, I'm Eric Vancil.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we'll see you guys on the next one.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.